how did you go from advertising to residential portfolio, sad endings to wellness resorts?
So what happened was, and thank you for that question, because there was a transition. So while I was still the CEO of the advertising agency, and I mentioned that I was advising mayors, there were some of my colleagues that knew that I was noticing that every time I provided a strategic plan for a city, that developers seemed to make money. And I was trying to figure out, well, how are they making money off of what it is that I am recommending? So I'd already was curious. I was just trying to figure out how they made their money. I needed to understand their model. So it was right around this time that I was, going through the devastation that I got accepted into USC's program for real estate finance and development. And they were putting together this program aimed at finding diverse entrepreneurs. So I was a great candidate for them because I had had success. In my ad agency, I had done a $250 million deal. So at the time, I had what was considered the largest Black multicultural agency in the world. So we were, $250 million back firm, 8 offices, 400 employees. So I was at a decent scale. And at that time, I was hoping to build that into a $1 billion organization. But I was burning out on advertising too. So there was, a little bit of, I didn't expect to get that far that early in my career. And then I was like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing this, right? So I was USC. And when I was coming out of the program, we had an opportunity to meet several, guests and supporters of the program. And one guy in particular, he hosted our dinner group. And he mentioned that he had an opportunity for a project manager to join his team. And so USC, of course, was pushing me as the poster child for the new entrepreneur. And I was like, I'm a little burnout in making payroll. And, I've got this new baby. My baby's only, I think he was about 3 at the time. I said, I think I'd rather be an executive, get a steady salary, gain the experience, and then be poised to launch my company later. And so that's what I did. But what I didn't know was I jumped into a company that had been about 20 years in the business, and we were building. And so we ended up having the largest privately held REIT in the nation, over 99,000 doors. We built luxury apartments, and we then sold that portfolio to Aimco, which is where we made $3.5 billion for that company. But my first 90 days on the job, I saved $1 million cost overrun and became a rock star.
Great experience. Right out of school, right?
Jumped right in. It was just a 2-week intensive program. It was like their master's program on steroids at USC. So we had to live on campus for those 2 weeks. And then we had to hit the ground running after that. And so, I jumped right in, hit the ground running, and the rest has become the legacy. So between that portfolio, I've controlled, billions and billions of dollars. And so our last project that we were completing was in Westwood. It's a mixed use development. So we're going back to mixed use. But I noticed that because, again, developers typically are segmented by an area of expertise. So whatever you do as your calling card initially is sort of how your business becomes identified. But more importantly, it's how you gain your financing. And so we were apartment luxury developers. So to do a mixed use, typically we knew how to do the apartments well, but the retail component was done on spec, and those numbers were zeroed out. And so that's so I left the company. I had an opportunity to join another organization that specialized on the retail part of that, because I wanted to know both sides of the numbers. And so I ended up doing a few deals where we bought underperforming apartments, and then I flipped those into condo in Las Vegas and in Henderson, Nevada. That's how I became familiar with working in that market. And then I had another portfolio of about 14 small lot projects. And then I got an opportunity to work with a company that specialized in retail centers. So they bought underperforming strip centers. And what we were doing is we had 5 key markets that I was in the process of subdividing the airspace and going to then create condos and create pedestrian friendly environments. So I'm a master of the entitlement and design process and all of that stuff. So I'm a developer. basically, at my core. And so in that situation, we were raising a fund, and about 2012 is when the markets just completely catapulted. So we weren't able to close on that fund, and that company ended up, kind of ultimately dissolving. They went from being about 1,000 people organization
Wow.
to down about 10 people
Wow.
by the time they allocated and got rid of the staffing and how they were running their
Mm.
business, just so that they could be lean and mean enough to survive. But that was kind of all along this journey. And so it was around that point that I realized that not only did I have certain asset class knowledge, but that I also wanted to diversify, because when I was looking at the demographics, that you had the boomers aging. And so I was looking at what would be the asset classes that would give me, again, another opportunity in terms of my experience. And that was either going to be hospitality or medical. And I had advised companies like, or again, early on, I was on the team for the Claremont Resort Hotel, which is a luxury hotel up in the Bay Area, which is where I'm from. And I was on the marketing team when they had decided to invest in this new thing called a spa. Before that became ubiquitous across properties, they invested $1 million. So I remembered that. And then I went on to be a consultant to Hyatt Regency, Park Oakland, and several other. And then my agency, we also had Cedars-Sinai was a client, the California State Department of Health Services. So I knew something about kind of this health side
Mhm.
of the bucket, but I didn't want to do hospitals, because to me, they are not places that I want to be. So that's when I started creating my whole idea behind this MediSpotel and what a
Mhm.
MediSpotel would be. So I created my own asset class.